She needed a break. The weight of her routine, her marriage, and the unspoken expectations she carried around were exhausting. That's what she told herself, at least, when she set out alone on a trail she'd found online. She hadn't even told her husband where she was going, only that she needed time for herself, space to breathe. The forest was quieter than she expected, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or call of a distant bird breaking the silence. She walked slowly, feeling the crunch of dry leaves beneath her boots, inhaling the scent of damp earth. Sunlight dappled through the branches, casting shifting patterns on the ground, and she felt herself begin to unwind. Here, she didn't have to be anyone's wife, anyone's caretaker. Just herself. She allowed her thoughts to drift, considering for a moment if her husband had even noticed her absence. These days, it seemed like they moved around each other, orbiting in separate spheres, barely touching. As she reached a bend in the trail, she saw someone standing by a tree, his back to her. A tall man, broad-shouldered, with dark skin that stood out against the greens and browns of the forest. She hadn't expected to see anyone here. It was supposed to be a secluded spot, not well known. The sight of him gave her a jolt, and she almost turned back, but something made her pause. He glanced over his shoulder, catching her gaze. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he smiled, just a small, casual smile that felt oddly comforting. She felt her heartbeat quicken as he turned toward her, closing the distance with easy strides. "Didn't think I'd run into anyone here," he said, his voice deep, smooth, with a warmth that immediately put her at ease. She nodded, a slight nervous laugh escaping her, unsure of what to say but unable to just walk away. "Yeah, same here," she replied, clearing her throat as she tried to steady herself. "It's really quiet out here." He nodded, studying her with a calm, almost unreadable expression. "I like it that way. Sometimes it's nice to escape from everything." The way he said everything resonated with her, and she wondered if he understood her better than he knew. She found herself mirroring his smile. They fell into a light conversation, and she learned his name was Marcus. He was confident, relaxed, with an air of openness she hadn't encountered in a long time. He didn't seem to hold back, speaking about his love for nature, his recent travels, the quiet solace he found in these trails. There was something magnetic about him, something she couldn't explain. His presence felt different, grounding, and yet it stirred something inside her. As they spoke, she found herself sharing more than she intended, small details about herself, her job, her feeling of being trapped in a cycle she couldn't quite break free from. She didn't mention her husband, though. Somehow, it felt irrelevant in this moment, with this stranger. Time seemed to slip by, and she noticed he was leaning slightly toward her as they spoke. The gap between them felt both natural and electric, like it was meant to be filled, yet neither of them was ready to make the move. Finally, she glanced away, laughing nervously, trying to steady herself. She could almost hear her conscience, but the thrill of the unexpected encounter was overpowering. "Well," she said, not really wanting to end their conversation but feeling the need to pull back. "I should keep going. Don't want to lose the light." "Sure," he replied, that calm smile never fading. "Maybe I'll see you again along the trail." He nodded, giving her a warm look that made her wonder what he was thinking, if he'd felt that same strange connection. With a small wave, she turned and walked on, feeling his eyes on her until she rounded the bend. The forest seemed somehow more vivid, more alive, as though it held secrets she hadn't discovered yet. She could still feel the faint trace of their conversation lingering in her mind, his voice, his gaze. As she moved deeper into the woods, she couldn't shake the feeling that something within her had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of excitement ripple through her. As she continued along the trail, her thoughts kept circling back to him. The feel of his calm, steady gaze, the warmth in his smile, it was unlike any encounter she'd had in recent memory. Part of her scolded herself for thinking about him at all, but the bigger part of her welcomed the thrill of the memory, the curiosity he stirred. Lost in thought, she didn't even notice him approaching again until she heard his footsteps behind her. She turned, surprised, and there he was, walking toward her with that same easy confidence. His presence felt both familiar and charged, a reminder of the conversation that had somehow connected them more deeply than she had intended. "Couldn't resist catching up," he said, his smile widening. She returned his smile, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in ages, as if she were stepping into a forgotten part of herself. They fell into step together, and the conversation resumed, this time with a more personal edge. She found herself opening up without hesitation. She shared bits of her life that she rarely admitted even to herself, the little disappointments, the feeling of being stuck, of wanting something different but not knowing what that was. Marcus listened intently, nodding, his expression understanding in a way that felt strangely comforting. There was a kindness in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't judging, only listening. He shared his own thoughts with the same openness, talking about the way he traveled to clear his mind, how he avoided getting tied down because he valued freedom, the thrill of unpredictability. She felt a pang of envy at his words, realizing how long it had been since she had felt anything like that herself. She saw a reflection of the person she once was, the adventurous, carefree version of herself she'd buried beneath responsibilities and expectations. The trail narrowed, forcing them closer together as they navigated the winding path. At one point, her foot slipped on a loose rock, and before she could catch herself, Marcus reached out, steadying her with a gentle but firm grip on her arm. The touch sent a jolt through her, as if the contact had a charge she hadn't anticipated. She felt her cheeks warm, a nervous laugh escaping her as she steadied herself. "Thank you," she managed, feeling her voice waver slightly. His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary before he let go, his gaze meeting hers, filled with an intensity that left her breathless. "No problem. Couldn't let you fall," he replied, his voice low, the words hanging in the air between them. They both paused, as if caught in the same magnetic pull that neither of them seemed ready to break.